Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time so that you don't have to. Patron request time. This is a happy occasion for me since I get to research and present to you one of the most enigmatic, powerful, and pivotal races of Faerun, the world of Toril, and countless other worlds, also countless other locations across the D&D multiverse. One of the original creator races of Toril that you have heard mentioned, but never really talked about in any detail. Today we're going to learn the secrets of the Lachey. First question. Do the Lachey still exist in contemporary D&D world of 5th edition? Yes, they absolutely do. One of the things about D&D is that things mentioned in previous editions remain factual until they are superseded by new information provided by new publications. And since we've seen nothing mentioned about the Lachey in 5th edition, everything we know about them is still completely canon. For example, in Dragon Magazine number 376, we learn that the Lachey Isles is home to Aldalf, High Lady of Sarafel, who is a Lachey, and Lachey rule the Lachey Isles, which is not that far from the oh-so-famous Sword Coast. Aldalf is described as nigh immortal. Like all Lachey, she can be killed, but never die of old age. Queen Aldalf has reigned as monarch of Sarafel for over 11 millennia. The Lachey Queen was severely weakened defending the Lachey Isles during the Spell Plague years, and today defers most matters of state to Prince Arethi. Like most Lachey, Aldalf remains breathtakingly beautiful and radiates an aura of majesty that commands respect. Her voice is symphonic, with strong chords resonating within her words. A Lachey is not an elf. They are tall and thin, with alabaster white skin and silver white hair. They have eyes that are completely black. The whole eye is a deep and lustrous black. They have a slight point to the ears, but nowhere near as much as elves do. They are as dexterous as an elf, as strong and enduring as a dwarf, but more importantly, they are imbued with intense supernatural power, on par with the oldest dragons. I can tell you exactly what the Lachey are capable of thanks to a listing in 3.5 edition's Epic Level Handbook. And I quote, "As elves are to humans, so are Lachey to elves, but more so. A race immortal, enigmatic, and exceptionally powerful. They are deeply individual beings. Some favour a particular colour or style, while others change their outfits from moment to moment. All are deeply concerned with etiquette, decorum, and receiving the respect they feel they are due. Failure to meet these standards of politeness or simply crossing one of their whims can often be fatal. All of the Lachey who exist are merely the remnant of a once great race whose origins are lost to history. More so than that, their history is completely eradicated. No trace of their past civilization remains, only a distorted current reality reflects what they achieved in their own personal past. They claim to have predated the current multiverse and refer darkly to some catastrophe that not only wiped out most of the people, their own people, but changed time so that their era never existed. And as far as any scholars of the current state of the multiverse know, they share a similar fate to the Spellweavers, the Aboleth, and the Illithid. They have no point of origin anymore. The multiverse itself, the entire timeline, has been altered, and their home reality is gone. Attempting to undo their own personal catastrophe would result in another disaster even more terrible. In the case of the Spellweavers, it would wipe hundreds of thousands of years of history from existence. It would unmake gods, eradicate whole civilizations, and perhaps unmake the very spheres of the prime material plane itself. It is unknown what would happen if the Lachey restored their original reality. They will not speak of it. They have no desire to wipe out all that remains, so those that remain are content to just exist, seeking ways to amuse themselves, to stave off ennui as they work out their own individual destinies. If one were to engage a Lachey in conversation about the history of the world, at a certain point they would stop and look off into the distance, perhaps muttering something very cryptic about the world that is and the world that was. Understanding the fate that befell them, it's not too shocking to realise that they really don't feel a great sense of ownership of the world around them. They have a very deep sense of displacement, a Twilight Zone existence where everything is not quite how it was supposed to be. Individual Lachey deal with this in their own ways. Some are callous and cruel, others are detached but basically benevolent, some resent the gods and the powers of the multiverse and find ways to subvert their efforts out of a deep sense of spite. Some carve out little kingdoms of their own, restoring in some small part the majesty they once knew. Lachey have great faculty at languages. You can speak any language to them, and within seconds of hearing it, spoken for the first time, it's as though they were native speakers of the language, and they always sound very refined and courtly. They are immortal unless killed. They're immune to all diseases and poisons, and have all the racial traits of elves. They should probably not be available as player characters, from my own personal preference, unless you're playing a really epic campaign, in which case they all have all of the elven traits, plus all of their stats are 1d6 plus 20, except for dexterity, which has a further plus 2 with a maximum of 30. They have a base movement speed of 40 feet per round. They don't tend to wear anything more than light armor. Their dexterity modifier applies to both their armor class and their bonus to hit with weapons. They manifest 2 weapons out of thin air at the first sign of combat. These are extensions of their life force, and I'll talk more about this in a moment. They have a huge amount of hit points, 28d10 plus 100, so between 128 and 380, with an average of 254 hit points. On top of that, they heal 10 hit points per round, and are resistant to all physical and magical forms of damage, with advantage on saving throws and legendary resistance 3 times per day, where they can simply choose to succeed at a failed saving throw instead. The magical powers of the Lachey are formidable. At will, they can cast Alter Self, Detect Thoughts, Blur, Freedom of Movement, Dispel Magic, Heal, Greater Invisibility, Knock, Speak with Plants, Counterspell, Teleport, and Water Breathing. They also have a Gaze ability with a range of 30 feet. All creatures within that area who meet the gaze of a Lachey become affected as if by a charm monster spell. The Wisdom saving throw has a difficulty class of 25. Each opponent within the range of the Lachey's gaze must attempt a saving throw each round at the beginning of their turn. A Lachey can also actively gaze as an attack action by choosing a target within range who must then attempt a saving throw. Lachey are immune, of course, to their own gaze and can pick and choose their targets within range. Also, they can release others from the enchantment whenever they want to, otherwise the effect can last up to an hour, assuming the being under its influence continually fails their saving throws with a DC of 25. That's not unreasonable. Lachey obviously have thousands and thousands of years to learn spell magic, take class levels, and master crafting professions. They are also tremendously skilled in hand-to-hand martial combat as fighters who, in their original reality, taught the elves how to fight with swords and bows. They manifest magical weapons out of thin air, as mentioned. These count as radiant, vorpal, +3 weapons of whatever kind the Lachey wishes to create. Most use either a bow or 2 longswords, which, as they are extensions of the Lachey, count as light weapons for them, for the purpose of dual wielding the 2 weapons. The Epic Level Handbook states that Lachey rarely initiate combat since they prefer to react rather than act. However, their vast experience makes them shrewd judges of others' capabilities and skilled tacticians. Their gaze ability, in addition to their terrible weapons, make them feared opponents. Lachey are also quick to utilize their spell-like abilities to prep for combat or flee from it. No Lachey hesitates to run away from a fight that is going against him or her, only to return to the fray when the odds are more favourable, possibly years or even decades later. While they may at first be confused with half-elves at first glance, Lachey have skin that is utterly pale, nearly translucent. Their hair is shockingly white and dead, looking almost brittle, and they tend to tower over most mortal races, averaging 6 feet and 6.5 feet tall, but many are taller, so they have an otherworldly, like a porcelain doll sort of appearance to themselves. Lachey tend towards androgyny. They certainly do make personal exceptions though. It's unclear if the Lachey even have the biological gender in the same manner as most humanoids, as they seem to accept whatever gender identity is placed on them by others, with that what occasionally seems to be bemusement. They are also no known new births by their kind in recorded history. It seems that they can reproduce, but none of them really wants to do so. It also seems likely that they have complete control over their biological processes to the point where they can literally become male or female or neither as they see fit. And that over the thousands and thousands of years that they have lived, they have taken on many different persona to explore different ways of existing. For this reason, they have a perspective that is similar to elves, only much, much more so. They rarely involve themselves in any events, and no settlements or communities of their people have ever been found. The greatest population walking around openly on the world of Toril today is currently located in Gwyneth Isle in the Moonshade Isles, on the Kingdom of Sarafel, with the High Lady Ordelf ruling the city of Carador for the last 11,000 years, up until at least 1479 DR. Around the time of the Spell Plague, High Lady Ordelf moved the city through a portal from the Feywild, and it rose from the depths of Lake Meriloch. The Fey forces soon routed the High King's troops and took control of the entire island of Gwyneth, which is now rife with Fey folk of all kinds. It's positively filthy with fairies. The Lachey are no strangers to the mortal races, though. They were quite deeply involved with the ancient Imaskari Empire, far to the southeast of the Sword Coast. They were certainly, well, it's across the entire continent of Faerun, really. They were certainly around during the Netherall Empire, and before them, during the era of the Elven Coronals and the many Crown Wars. They were there when the dragons and giants fought each other for over 1,000 years. They witnessed the growth of the giant empire of Astoria. They were there when the elves shattered the supercontinent of Faerun into what became known as the Sundering. They saw the fall of the avian, the amphibian, and the reptilian creator races. From their point of view, modern Toril is a world of buried ruins and echoes of past glories, the graveyard of forgotten civilizations that they remember like it was just yesterday. Their gaze can be deeply disturbing to those who know the actual age of the Lachey they are facing, but they rarely walk the world in their true form. Little is known about the reclusive Lachey. Their existence has been recorded as far back as records exist, but they are intensely private, rarely granting any personal details to others, not even their own names. They tend to take on a persona and a new physical form and stay in that guise for many years at a time, becoming deeply entrenched in the playing of this role, to the point that even a mind-reading attempt for some lucky reason manages to get past their defences, will reveal a being that has come to identify with its role that they've assumed. They manage to almost forget for a time that they are Lachey, and instead are content to distract themselves with a smaller, humble, mortal life. They seem to be two chief common threads when it comes to the motivations and personalities of the Lachey. First is novelty, the great interest in that which they have never, or at least rarely, encountered before, or at least twice. A Lachey has been known to have been drawn from their philosophy of uninvolvement into approaching the sensates faction of Sigil and the larger cosmos for potential membership, only to decline at the last moment. Many seem to choose to pursue artistic endeavours as part of a satisfying pursuit of the new and the fresh, for this desire, generating their own novelty, while others seem to choose an itinerant life, wishing to see all there is to see of this reality that may not be their own. This is the classic case of an artist or a wanderer who just moves on constantly because they've seen it, they want to see something fresh, they want to see something new. They're never satisfied with staying there and seeing things over and over again. Also, it's an artist who creates a spectacular, wondrous thing only to let it burn after they've finished with it. Second is etiquette. In many ways similar to the Fey, the Lachey are utterly enslaved to their own ways and habits. Their views on proper behaviour long ingrained into them, and as a result they find great frustration in those that act in ways that they find indecorous or impolite. They are quick to take offence and take offence and very slow to forgive those who act against their arcane views on manners, and those that transgress them are often they quickly find themselves banished from the Lachey's presence and, if not, beaten to within an inch of their life. Lachey fill the spectrum of alignments. They can be shining exemplars of goodness, law, justice and light. They can also be the worst, malignant, devious and utterly merciless kind of evil. The truth is, many have been both. They accept this about their own kind. They do not judge each other on how they have managed to cope with the endless roll of years, and in part, this also explains their rigid attention to etiquette. A Lachey in the role of a powerful paladin may sit down and have a polite conversation with the worst, most bloodthirsty necromancer, each of them carefully observing the strict rules of behaviour, and as they both recognise another Lachey whenever they encounter each other, this would seem like crazy behaviour from those mortals around them, but it makes perfect sense to the Lachey. They're just going through a phase. They don't tend to gravitate to extremes of identity these days, though. They've seen it all before. They've no desire for wars and conflicts and bloodshed. They don't have much interest in gods and the machinations of devils and demons. They do find arcane research interesting and are always captivated by mysterious evolutions in nature or new discoveries across the multiverse. They are more likely to just calmly observe a disaster unfolding rather than step in and try to help anyone. They've seen it all before. It's all pointless. And they care little for what someone as short-lived as a human considers ancient and sacred. This can run them into conflicts, as can situations where they find themselves trapped and compelled to stay in a place or act a certain way. They hate being manipulated in any way and hate having to do boring, monotonous things for lesser beings. They're not heartless, they're not all heartless and disinterested, they just seem to appear that way. Most of the time, even elves find them a bit disconcerting as they're not used to being regarded as nothing more than infants. Dwarves don't have much to do with the Lachey, nor do halflings know much about them, but gnomes find them absolutely fascinating when they encounter them, and Lachey tend to find gnomes a refreshingly interesting race. Mind you, they also find orcs, dragonborn and warforged really interesting. Like, subscribe, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and for all the scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.